There we are. All right, so you'll see there's a little red button on the bottom, and that's being recorded. Great. So welcome to Global Health 390. This is Managing Global Health Challenges. How many of you have taken global health classes before? So Paulina, this is your first one. And Angela?
Sorry, I have.
Oh, good. Which class did you take?
Intro to Global Health and Global Bioethics.
Oh, great. And Paulina, which class did you take?
Wait, this is my first one. I
Oh,
haven't.
sorry, that's right. And Kira, which class did you take?
This is also my first one.
Great. Okay, so I'll be the new standard for all of you. That's a great honor to be that way. And Ella, were you a global health student at Ohio, Miami?
Miami didn't actually have a global health major. We did have a global health course under anthropology, which I took during my time there. But I've since come to Northwestern. I took infectious disease eradication last quarter and had so much fun.
Oh,
So
he's a great professor. Good.
yeah,
Um, and in anthropology, do you consider yourself to be a medical anthropologist?
I would like to, yeah. Yeah.
Great. So this is mostly about medical anthropology, and we'll talk a lot about cultural sensitivity and so forth in this class.
Mhm.
So at any point, if you have any questions or comments, this is the smallest class that I've actually ever taught. So you're quite lucky in that you get to talk a lot, and I hope you do. But if you have any questions or comments at any point during my lectures, just please feel free to ask me. Raise your hand or just yell out or whatever. So I'm going to switch now to a lecture. Let's see here. So can you all see, it says Managing Global Health Challenges PowerPoint? Okay, great. So today we're going to go over the purpose of the course. We'll look at an overview. I'll go through some expectations, me of you, and then I'd love to hear your expectations of what you'd like to get out of the course. And then we'll do that through the introductions and background. We'll talk about what is global health and why it matters. And then we'll talk about global epidemiology and a glossary of terms used in the course and resources. And then we'll talk later on about the articles that I hope you were able to read. Have all of you been able to find the books that I've required? Okay, good. I know the managing health, the coming plague is really a big book, but you'll actually find it really readable. She's an amazing journalist, and she tells stories of real life events in the history of global health. And wherever you go in the future of healthcare or medicine, all of these stories are kind of at the origin of the global health movement. And so they'll all come in handy for you as you think about health issues and how to respond. So the purpose of this course is to explore the current and future threats to public health, to examine the current organizational structures that have been established to respond, to analyze examples of effective intervention strategies, and then to look at professional opportunities in the field of global health. By the way, if there's anything else that I'm not covering, once you look at the syllabus and so forth, if there are any topics that you would like me to address or to add or to substitute, just let me know, and I can certainly, alter the course to include whatever your concerns are. So what are you going to get out of this course? So as a result of taking this course, you will be able to participate in the field of global health and explore professional and volunteer opportunities. You're going to understand health as a human as well as a medical and technological challenge. You'll be able to utilize the epidemiology of infectious and chronic disease as a management tool. You'll be able to analyze the roles and benefits of strengthened integration of public, private, and civil society sectors in public health. And you'll be able to explore and critique specific health interventions. So it'll give you a perspective on kind of a critical analysis of how to look at health health issues and how we're responding as a society. So I hope you've all had a chance to review the syllabus. And one of the requirements in the class is participation. And obviously attendance is a big part of this. It's 10% of your final grade is participation. And while attendance is about 4%, every week there's a discussion post where you can just add comments and make some notes, or you could insert issues of interest. That's 3%. And then your participation in class is worth 3%. So I hope you'll be able to just raise your hands and participate. There's going to be 2 midterm exams in the course, one midterm, and one final exam. And these are take-home exams. And then there's going to be a research paper. And I'm sure you guys have all done research papers. The research papers are 25% of your, actually, hang on, I got to change that. It's 30% of your final grade. And they should be about 10 to 12 pages. And the point of the research paper is for you to identify a health issue that's of interest to you. And secondly, to look at some kind of intervention. It could be a public sector. It could be like WHO or UNICEF or the Centers for Disease Control, or you can take the private sector. So there could be some groups like pharmaceutical companies or consulting groups, or there are a lot of private development companies that work in public health. Or there are hundreds of people in the organizations in the civil society or nonprofit sector. So you got to pick an organization and then take a look at how it's addressing that health issue. And then the third part of your paper is to analyze what are the best practices that you found? What are some lessons that you learned from looking at that example? How do they measure their success? Are there some other metrics that you might want to look at outcomes? And then acting as a consultant to make some recommendations as to how the organization might improve their impact. We'll talk a lot more about that. One of the ideas, of course, is then we would foster a partnership. I hope that we could identify some teams. And as we get through the course, you'll be able to identify your area of interest, and hopefully another student will also share your interest, and we can end up working on a joint paper. Why am I interested in teamwork for your final paper? You guys can raise your hands. I can see you. So anybody think, why would I be interested in promoting teamwork? Yeah, Kira.
I guess because in like this field for interventions, it's practically impossible to like do it by yourself. Because especially, this is global health, so you have to be working with other teams from maybe other countries and like get all of their perspectives along with it. It's just like something that's like it'd be very like strange to like do it alone, I guess.
Although there are a lot of people that do it alone, so it's not out of the question, but you're absolutely right. And not only that, but how many of you have worked professionally with something and been given an assignment of a project, and you're usually part of a team, aren't you? And in some cases, not every member of the team is singing the same song. And so you have to learn to get along with people and find some kind of accommodation of working together with people. So you're absolutely right. Teamwork is one of these essential tools. Now, I can't require you to find a partner, but I do strongly encourage you. And we'll talk a lot more about that. So the midterm is worth 30, your research paper is worth 30, your final exam is worth 30, and your attendance is worth 10. So artificial intelligence. Have you guys discussed this in class before, in any of your classes? No. So there's really no way that I can absolutely determine whether or not you used AI. There are things that I can do that strongly suggest it. And I have had students in the past, unfortunately, who've relied very heavily on it, and they've been sort of found guilty of plagiarism. So AI is an important tool, and I'm sure you guys use it. But I hope you use it as a tool rather than depending upon it to write your papers. I think you probably all agree, I hope you all agree, that learning to think critically is one of the most important assets you can get out of a university education, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. Learning to think critically is what really separates you from a lot of the folks that don't go on to higher education. It goes back to Socrates. It goes back to the foundations of democracy. But learning to think critically is absolutely essential. So you can also obviously use ChatGPT or any of the other AI engines. If you do use it in a paper, you have to cite it and show me where you used it. I've often found that it's very good as an introduction, kind of like Wikipedia. So if you're just starting to think about a research topic, it's really great to go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and then ask them the question, and they can give you a lot of areas in which to investigate. So it's a great tool that you can use to further your analysis. Just please be careful. As you know, AI is not fully developed as a really good instrument yet. And frequently it makes up its own citations, and I do check citations. And secondly, it's not always giving you a singular individualistic response. It's usually more generic. So please, by all means, feel free to use them, but just please be careful. How many of you have ever talked to a librarian at the library, either by Zoom or in person? So one thing I would highly recommend, especially as you start working on your research papers, librarians are very strange people. That's all I can say. Let me just get out of here for a second. Librarians are very strange people. They actually live on your problems. That's actually how they pursue their interests. You are giving them a problem that they probably have never seen before. And so they learn along with you about where to go to look up the research. What's great about a librarian is there are so many academic databases that what they can do is once you explain what you're looking for, they can guide you to a whole variety of very appropriate databases and places to look. One of the common problems is that we often get the keyword wrong. We think we know what it is, but when you do more of an academic research, you can find that there's more common keywords or different keywords that are used. And so even if you really don't need a librarian, because you're finding a lot of academic peer-reviewed sources, I always encourage you, just check anyway. And by the way, it's not just for academic research, but suppose you're looking for a job or a position someplace, they can help you look for different search engines for professional opportunities. Librarians, in my experience, are just extraordinary people, and I just really encourage you to use them. So do you all know what a peer-reviewed article is? So, Angela, do you know what a peer-reviewed article is?
Like loosely.
Okay, so as you all know, anybody, and we all do this all the time, we do internet searches, and internet searches usually give us a whole variety of articles and a lot of times gossip and a lot of misinformation. A peer-reviewed article is a scientific article in which the author has submitted their research to a panel of judges, usually at a journal. And so the peers, people like you, review the article to make sure that the research methodology sounds appropriate and reasonable, and that the data that they generate is reasonable, and that their analysis of the author's analysis is also reasonable. And if it passes these peer reviews, then it gets published in a peer-reviewed journal. And this is substantially different than a newspaper article. Even though they do a lot of investigation, it's not the same thing as a peer-reviewed article. So in your final papers, I do ask for at least 5 peer-reviewed articles. And of course, you can supplement that with newspaper articles and other reports and things like that. But it's really important that you begin to think about what your topic is and to work with a librarian and kind of figure out, about the academic aspects of this. Um, so. All right, so you've got the two books, which is Laurie Garrett's book, The Coming Plague, and then Tracy Kidder's book about. Do all of you know who Paul Farmer is? So, Ella, you shake your head. So, who is Paul Farmer?
It's been a while, and I haven't actually read this book yet, so I'm very excited to. But he was a medical anthropologist who did his work primarily in Haiti, I think.
Yep.
And he did a really good job of framing like the way he framed health and people's stories was very I don't know, I just always remember multiple times, and I'm blanking on it now, one article of his that traced three stories. And I guess that's he was an MD PhD sort of.
Yeah, he's kind of the gold standard when people think about global health workers. His will almost always come up first. He was a physician, a medical anthropologist, a practicing Catholic, so he had a very strong religious bent. Um, but he was tremendously empathetic, and he really felt for the most vulnerable people, the poor people around the world. It didn't matter whether you were in New York City or Boston or Port-au-Prince or Cannes, or he did work all over the world. The book that we'll read will really talk about him. Um, I really suggest to everybody don't be like Paul, because he basically gave up his life to do all of these things. He was a journalist and researcher and doctor and just did a variety of things. But there's a lot of things that we can learn from him, and we'll discuss a lot about that in Tracy Kidder's book. He did pass away about 3 years ago of a heart attack in Rwanda, where he had moved. But the program in Haiti is still going on, and we'll talk a great deal about that. And so the Paul Farmer book, the Tracy Kidder, by the way, he also just passed away this year. And you'll find out it's an extraordinary book. It's very personal, but it's a great story, and it might be. I hope it'll be an inspiration to all of you. By the way, I like to use the term glocal as opposed to global health, because I think health is both global and local. And if you don't like to use the term glocal, and by the way, you could feel free to use it. Nobody else is using it, but by all means, go and abuse that term. Another way of looking at it is community health, because people live in communities. And when we think about health, it's people's relationship to the environment in which they live. And it doesn't matter whether that community is in Chicago or that community is in Rwanda. It's the local community that's important. And so you, as a physician or as a medical anthropologist or anybody working in global health, how we approach people within a community really seems to me to be the most important perspective. And that's something that Paul Farmer will learn more about that. Um, so let's see here. Okey-doke. So there are a bunch of optional books here. One of you is an engineering student. Who is an engineering student?
I am mechanical engineering.
Oh, great. Okay. So there's this great book down here by Rebecca Richards Court. I think you can get it from the library, but it's about biomedical engineering for global health. It's a very different perspective. And for those of you that have never had global health and you really want to just learn the field, this first book is a very nice textbook. It just gives you a really great introduction. And I know several of you have already taken Introduction to Global Health. I've just found this to be a wonderful perspective on global health. And for those of you who are anthropologists, I don't know, Ella, have you ever read this book?
No, but I I have a lot of books that I've bought and then I run out of time to start, and that is one of them, and it's sitting in my pile of books for this class.
Great. This is an extraordinary story. It's a true story of a Hmong family. That's Hmong, who came in from, it's a tribal group between Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand and Vietnam. And they're hill people. And they were very much caught up in the Vietnam War. They sort of aligned themselves with the United States, and they became a kind of a block against the expansion of communism. And when the communists won, they had to leave because they were going to be killed. And so the U.S. brought in hundreds of thousands of them as refugees, and a lot of them migrated to Minneapolis. And this is a story of one family who had migrated to Minneapolis, and they had a baby girl, and the baby girl caught epilepsy. And they brought the baby to a doctor, a team of pediatricians, who tried to treat the baby according to Western medical standards. But what the pediatricians were not aware of, even though there was a translator involved, they were not aware that this particular family had a completely different idea of health and disease, completely different, non-Western. So they didn't understand about medications. They didn't understand about the timing of taking pills, of compliance with all kinds of recommendations. And the pediatricians did not pick up on that. They just kept giving the same information, but trying in different ways. And the story is very sad and is very hard to read because the child ultimately died. But the beautiful part of this story is that the pediatricians learned to listen to the Hmong people, and they learned about a different perspective on disease and health. And they began to moderate their recommendations towards the Hmong. And the Hmong people at the same time learned a little bit about Western medicine. It's an extraordinary true story. And Minneapolis is practicing that kind of relationship today. So it's a very hard book to read, but if you're interested in a personal story, that's a really great one. The Shirley Lindenbaum book, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. She was one of my professors. She was an Australian anthropologist that worked in New Guinea. Kuru is a spongiform encephalopathy. It's like mad cow disease. It's a prion disease. And in fact, prions were discovered as a result of this particular people, this group called the Foray in New Guinea. And so we now understand what prions are and why they're so dangerous. But nobody could understand why the people were being infected with it. And a lot of folks thought it was genetic. And they called it a laughing disease because people had, when they got the disease, by the way, it's a very degenerative nervous disease. And so their brains begin to get these huge holes in them, but their face comes like this. It's sort of like a smiling face. So they called it a laughing disease, even though it was degenerative and people died from it. But they could never figure out where it came from. And so they were saying, oh, this must be a genetic disease. But Dr. Lindenbaum found out that there were people alive who still remembered the first case. And so if you can still remember the first case, then it's not a genetic disease. It was somehow was introduced. But a lot of folks thought, well, maybe it's because of cannibalism. And of course, in New Guinea, because it was under the Australian law, cannibalism was illegal. But Dr. Lindenbaum lived among these people for 2 years, and she became a very trusted member of their society. And she participated in their rituals. And one of the rituals when a person died was that the grandmothers would roast the cadaver over fire, and then they would distribute the cooked flesh among the members of the tribe. And the grandmothers got the brains, which is why they were so badly infected. And because she found this out, and because she realized that that was the mechanism for the distribution of the prions, she was trusted by them. She was able to convince them to stop the practice. and the disease dissipated. So being able to gain trust among the people you work with is one of the lessons from her work. And that's, that's one of the enduring problems that we'll be dealing with during this quarter. The last book that's recommended on this is about medical apartheid. And if any of you are interested in working with African Americans, it's an essential book. It's also one of the most painful books I've ever read. It goes to the history of the exploitation of Black people in this country in terms of the medical experimentation on them. And it explains in great detail why a lot of Black people are extremely fearful of doctors and sort of the whole medical establishment. These practices aren't as terrible as they were in the past, but they are continuing. I'll just give you one example. Many doctors come out of medical school with the opinion that Black people have a higher tolerance for pain than white people, which is complete nonsense. But what that means is, and their stories are just really awful, they'll take a biopsy of a woman's lump in a woman's breast without anesthesia because they just think that the Black woman will have a higher tolerance for pain. But if you really want to understand sort of the history of experimentation and medical abuse in this country, this is an important book to read. And it is just very important. All right, let me go back here. So today I hope you've been able to read some of these articles that I suggested. We'll talk some more about those today, including the NGO Code of Conduct. We'll talk about that. Now, what I've tried to do is I just put down a whole lot of other readings. Now, I don't know of all your interests yet, so I'll find out more in a little while. But if there are areas that you're interested in, please do let me know, and I'll be happy to kind of take a look at other articles. But some of you might be interested in the economic impact, or some of you may be interested in the implications of COVID, or some of you might be interested in the environmental impact and so forth. So I've just tried to take a look of a lot of supplemental readings. It's not required. It's just things for you to take a look at if you're interested. Here's a whole bunch more. They're all available either on Canvas or you can look up in the course reserves. And so next week, we'll just continue the readings. And again, we've got some more optional. And this is where I talk a little bit about all the climate information. And we'll talk a lot about climate. Are any of you interested in climate issues, environmental health? Okay, so that might be something just to keep an eye on. Then we've got taking a look at some wonderful movies. These are all on course reserves, and so you might want to take a look at them. We will watch one video in class, which is, let's see, which one is it? We're going to look at Disease Warriors, but I'd like you to watch How Safe Are We? They're about an hour in length. And then if you want to look at some of the other ones, this was just a remarkable series. By the way, Brad Pitt is the narrator, so it's kind of fun to listen to him. But these are just wonderful, wonderful films. And then we have some other readings. And then again, there's just a lot of, there's a lot of optional delays here. The following week, the fourth class, we'll talk about the World Health Organization and how that came to be. And we'll take a look at international cooperation. And again, there's a lot of optional readings. I will also, I'm going to try to get a friend of mine from the Red Cross to come and lecture. They're a little bit busy right now, and they're undergoing a sort of a reorganization at the moment. So I'm not sure that she can come, but I will talk about the Red Cross as a great example of an organization, of an intergovernmental kind of an agency. Fifth class, I'll talk about polio eradication, which is where I spent a good 10 years of my life. And well, we'll talk about the power of partnerships, which is a partnership between Rotary International, which is where I worked, the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, UNICEF, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all the national governments in the world. It's an amazing partnership. And also, after the class on the 4th of, oh, wrong date. After the class on the 22nd of July, I will send you the midterm by email after class. And then what I'd like you to do is just complete it. There's one section which is kind of short answers, and then there's one section on an essay. The short answers, it sounds like it's a short answer, but I really encourage you to write as much as possible in answering each question. Don't just give me a quick one-liner. And the more you write, even in the short first part of it, the better off you'll be. So I give you 15 choices, and you have to select 5 of them. And on the essays, it's I give you 4 options, and you have to choose one. And it's an essay of not more than 2 pages. And so if you could complete all of that and just return it to me in the assignment portal by Saturday, that would be great. So on the next week, we'll talk about global health disparities and cultural competency. This is the real medical anthropology part of the course, but we'll really go into great depth about the importance of cultural competency, cultural sensitivity, and why culture is so important to how we pursue things. Then the following week, well, sorry, these are just more articles. I kind of went crazy here, but these are all optional, but there's a lot of really interesting reading here. The next week, we'll talk about politics of international health, and we'll look at the role of pharmaceutical corporations. And I know that's very controversial, but I've done a great deal of work with Abbott, with Eli Lilly, with Baxter, with AbbVie and other ones, and Merck, etc. And we'll talk about why it's important to try to find a partnership, even with some of what we would consider the evil empire. But the evil empire is a very important part of health because they've come up with pretty amazing drugs and an approach towards healthcare. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of supplemental reading here, and a lot of this gets to governance issues. And who was it? Was it Angela? Who took the course in bioethics? Angela?
Yeah, I have.
So we'll talk a lot about the importance of these ethical and moral frameworks. And one of the serious governance structures is, remember, it used to be called corporate social responsibility. You guys know that phrase? Have you ever heard CSR, corporate social responsibility? What does that mean to you?
I don't remember much, but I feel like it was just that like there was like an era where corporations were like making a not a it's like making a big deal is not the right way to phrase it, but they were kind of like saying, "Oh, well, these are the things that we're trying to work on to like give back to the earth, I guess, like to people and being nice."
Yep, absolutely. And by the way, anytime somebody uses the phrase give back, my first question is, well, what did you take away in the first place that you have to give back, that you have to give something back? So we'll talk a lot about this because it's actually a partnership, because you want to be able to do things that benefit people as opposed to exploit them. And there's a lot of examples on both sides. The core parts of corporate social responsibility are ESG, which is the environment, social commitments, and then governance. And if an organization is really committed towards the environment, towards protecting the environment, if they're also committed to promoting a social impact, both for their employees and for the people that use their products, and they're committed to good governance structures, that's a kind of a different type of organization. How many of you like to eat at Chipotle? Okay, but you all know what Chipotle is? And Kira, what's different about Chipotle?
It's different.
Besides there being huge burritos, what else is different about them? And
I
be
know.
so it's antibiotic free. All of their meats do not use antibiotics. And do you know who created Chipotle? Anybody want to take a guess? McDonald's. Why would McDonald's want to create Chipotle? So I'm assuming you guys don't eat very much McDonald's, but do you remember one of the criticisms of McDonald's meat? It's got a lot of antibiotics in it. It's not sourced in a way, plus it's got a lot of other additives and things like that. So McDonald's was getting a lot of criticism from consumers that saying, oh, we love the taste of your product, but you're killing us with all of the stuff you're putting into your hamburgers and chicken and stuff. So Chipotle was invented by McDonald's as an alternative to McDonald's, an antibiotic-free food. And people just loved it, and they still do. Kira, I suppose, do you still love Chipotle? I mean, it's very tasty and good food, and it's actually healthy for you. The sad thing is that they got caught by this terrible guy that was trying to, he was one of these venture capitalist guys, and he forced McDonald's to sell it so it's independent. But the other one that McDonald's also created, do you guys remember Boston Market for rotisserie chicken? No? Okay. So anyway, McDonald's was trying all kinds of different things to be able to be more responsive to its consumers. Let's see here. No. Hang on 1 second, please, for 1 minute. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. So then on the 8th class, we'll talk about nutrition and health. Let's talk about Chipotle. How many of you guys are interested in nutrition? So one of the things that I'm very interested in is the relationship between nutrition and cognitive development. So one thing we'll talk about this, we'll break up the class at 2:30, and I encourage all of you for 15 minutes to get something to drink, to get hydrated, to get something to eat, to replenish yourself, because I'm a firm believer in the relationship between nutrition and cognitive development. But you think about children under the age of 5, and do you guys all know about the Head Start program? Have you heard about that? It was a wonderful program that provided free breakfasts for all children under 5 who come from marginalized families. And incredible because, under 5 is part of the development process. And it was just stopped this year by the Trump administration. So our children under 5 are at serious risk, and it has very serious consequences for their future. Do you all know what the breakfast of choice is for Chicago public school children in middle school? What's the breakfast of choice? Flaming hot Cheetos and a can of pop. Now, do you think that's a good breakfast? So we have a lot of work to do. And one of my colleagues is a nutritional epidemiologist. I've never even heard of that before, but she is absolutely unbelievable. And one of the things that she realizes is that there are a lot of people, particularly young people, that are actually fearful of eating because there's so many sort of weird things in our water and our food and so forth that we don't know what to eat. And so she started a website called Eating Joyfully, and helping people take a deep breath, And we'll start figuring out what works for you because everybody's biome is a little bit different and your metabolism is different. So we all have to pay attention to what we're eating and sort of find appropriate solutions, but not to be afraid of eating. That's one of the most important things. So she'll come in and talk to us about that, I hope. Let's see where we are here. Okay. So the last class we have, I will talk to you guys about some professional opportunities. I'm a strong believer that each of you has sort of, bless you, each of you has three options for what you want to do with global health. One, and ideally, you'll find a job either as a physician or as a nurse or as a health technologist or somewhere dealing with health, and where your values and your employment go hand in hand. But sometimes that doesn't work out. And so you may have to do some pragmatic things just to live. It doesn't matter if you flip burgers at McDonald's. You need to do what you need to do in order to survive until you can find a better option. But at the same time, you can volunteer. And when you volunteer, you select the organization that you want to volunteer with. And that's a great entry point into the organization because they get to know you, you get to know them, and sometimes that actually sort of morphs into a professional opportunity. And lastly, how many of you consider yourself to be a philanthropist? So how many of you have been stopped by somebody on the street, or you received something in the mail or something where it just touched your heart and you reached into your pocket, you took out $5 or $20, or you sent a check or something? Has that ever happened to any of you where you've just become sort of so overwhelmed on the spot that you just give somebody some money? Well, that's a philanthropist. It's not the amount of money that you give, it's the thoughtfulness with which you give it. And even though it may seem like a compassionate response is a very quick response, we want to encourage you to think more carefully about who you're sharing your money, your time, your resources with. And that's what philanthropy is all about. So I'd like you actually all to think about yourselves as philanthropists because you do have resources to share. It's money, it's time, it's connections, it's all kinds of other resources. And so I just want you to be thoughtful about how you share yourself with others. And that's the philanthropist point. So we'll get you to start thinking differently about the world. Also on the 19th of August, your research papers will be due. And the following week, there's no class, it's reading week, but your final exam will be sent just like the midterm exam after class, and that'll be due back again on the Saturday. So let me share a little bit about myself. So I'm a medical anthropologist. I kind of started my career growing up in New York City. I was working actually with the YMCA. Do any of you know about the YMCA? Have any of you had a YMCA experience? No. Well, the YMCA is probably well known around. So Ella, you have had an experience with the Y? What was it?
Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi is being bad. I don't know. I am from a really rural area of Ohio but not so rural that we weren't it was like my town and another town, and in between there was like a Y in the middle, and it was like the only place with like an indoor pool, like a gym and sort of like a recreational like facilities in the area apart from like our schools themselves. So actually like that were only like really open for students. So that was mainly my exposure, and I did a lot of club swim there when I was young.
That's great. Well, what you may not know, the YMCA was created in London in 1844, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. And if you think about, I'm sure you guys have all seen movies about London in that period, or you've read Charles Dickens. So you can just imagine all of the thick smoke from all the factories and the pollution, both in the sewers and the smells of rotting sewage and the open markets. And think about all the children that were brought in from the rural areas to work in these factories that would lose fingers and sometimes be crushed by the machines. So a lot of these children were going in, especially the young boys, were going into prostitution. They were going into drugs. They were going into gambling. So a group of young men, 5 young men, business people, just got together and they created a youth hostel so that young people had a safe place for them to go, so they wouldn't be corrupted by society. During that period, Queen Victoria had actually had some sedition laws, and she made it illegal for any institution or person to criticize the government or criticize industrialization. You'd be put in jail. And then around the 1840s, she lifted the Sedition Act, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of organizations began to appear. Boy Scouts, YMCA, Girl Scouts, groups like that. But interestingly, in 1855, the first international organization was created in Geneva, Switzerland, because this idea of these youth hostels was spread by sea captains, by Methodist sea captains around the world, so that by 1849, 1850, there were YMCAs in Boston, in Tokyo, in Calcutta, in Rio de Janeiro, and all throughout Europe. And so in 1855, these national YMCAs got together and created the first World Alliance of YMCAs. It's the first international organization. I ended up working for the World Alliance. I'll tell you that story in a bit. But one of the really interesting things was that in 1859, one of the young men who had been part of that World Alliance, of creating that international organization, was a Swiss businessman from Geneva named Henri Donant. And he had a problem, was looking for Napoleon to work out his problems. And he came across a war between Napoleon and the Italian Confederates and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And there were thousands of people that were killed. And he came across this battlefield. And he was so upset by what he saw that he came back to Geneva and he created the International Committee of the Red Cross. And the ICRC is one of the most important humanitarian organizations today. And it comes out of the YMCA because this man knew how to bring people together. And so we'll talk about that. But the Y is a really interesting organization. And I grew up in the YMCA in New York City. And one of my first jobs was to work with children from the South Bronx. And at that time, kids in the South Bronx were living in burned out ghettos. There was a lot of drugs, just a lot of terrible things happening. So we would take these kids from middle school and we would bring them to upstate New York to an environmental education camp. So I'm a huge fan of environmental education, but I really fell in love with the Y, number one. And number two, I couldn't understand how a city as wealthy as New York could have so many people that were in such bad shape. I mean, we've all heard about Harlem and East Bronx and all sorts of other places. So when I went to college, I fell in love with anthropology because anthropology talks about different cultures and different societies and the development and the evolution of societies. So when I graduated, the YMCA had a program called Young Professionals Abroad. And actually, the Peace Corps was founded on this YMCA program. And I was sent to Bangladesh, where I lived for 2 years. And this is just after the war for independence. So you may remember that when India was divided in 1947, it was split into basically 3 parts. One was a Hindu part, which was India, and then there were 2 parts which were Islamic. One was West Pakistan, which is what Pakistan is today, and the other was East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh today. It's then called East Bengal. And the Pakistanis had basically exploited the East Pakistanis the Bengalis, including trying to get them to change their language from Bengali to Urdu. And that created just an enormous problem. So the East Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis, decided to separate from Pakistan. And the Pakistanis sent soldiers into Bangladesh, and they used rape as a weapon of war. And so there were thousands of women who were raped. And in Islamic society, in this Islamic society in Bangladesh, when a woman is raped, they're cast out of the family. And so there were a lot of women with their children that had no longer any relationship to society. There were about 25 million displaced women. So I arrived at the War for Independence took place from 1971 to 72, and I was there from 77 to 79. So we're still dealing with a huge amount of poverty and displaced people. But I began to work with the refugees, I began to work with displaced people, and I began to work with relief programs and rehabilitation and development. And I learned a great deal about how we should respond to people in these kinds of situations. Extraordinary experience, but I eventually had more questions than I had answers, and I decided to go back to school. So I went to the school with the graduate faculty for the New School for Social Research in New York. I got my master's in medical and social anthropology, and started to work for the YMCA, what's called the International Division of the YMCA in New York. And then I was hired by the world headquarters in Switzerland to work as the Associate Director for Refugees and Rehabilitation. And in those days, we had about 20 different refugee crises. So you all know about the Vietnamese who were forced to leave Vietnam. And so there were refugee camps in Hong Kong, in Cambodia, in Thailand. And the YMCA was running a lot of these camps. We also had a huge problem, obviously, in the Middle East. So there were a lot of displaced people, Palestinians, on the West Bank and in Gaza, as well as in Jerusalem. And so the YMCA's had programs in all the West Bank cities and also in Gaza, as well as Jerusalem. So I did a lot of the work there with the Palestinians. Also, Lebanon had a civil war back then. And so I was involved in working with displaced people from the medical program. There was a big problem back in those days where our President Ronald Reagan had sent our military to support military dictatorships throughout Central America. So Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, Panama, Costa Rica. So I was sent to all of these countries to figure out, there were millions of displaced people because of how brutal these military dictatorships were. And so I was sent down to work with the YMCAs in all these countries to figure out strategies of how we can provide support, psychosocial support, as well as other kind of relief and rehabilitation programs. On top of that, there was a war in Ethiopia, and about 1 million Ethiopians fled into eastern Sudan, not only because of the war, but also because the president was practicing a genocide by famine, and he was deliberately starving people. So we had about 1 million Ethiopians that were fled into eastern Sudan. So I was sent to Khartoum and then to Gadaref, which is in the eastern province, to figure out strategies for helping some of these refugees in those camps. There was other problems in Sri Lanka and Nigeria and Ghana, and there were a few other places around the world. But I also had to raise money. So I went to Norway and Germany and the Netherlands and England and Japan. And I also had to work with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the US State Department and a whole variety of faith-based organizations and other groups. So I really learned how to differentiate between who was a good partner and who was not. So I did that for 4 years, and then I came back to this country, and I worked again for the USY and building partnerships between local USYs and international Ys. And then I was hired by Rotary International to run their global program to eradicate polio. So do any of you know about Rotary International, Rotary clubs? Have any of you had a Rotary experience? So I'm sure you know as you when you go into a small town or even a big city, there's a signboard that says "Welcome to Evanston." And then you'll see all of these different organizations. There's a Rotary Wheel, there's Kiwanis, there's Lions Clubs, there's all these different service organizations. Excuse me. And so Rotary was invented in Chicago in 1905 by a lonely lawyer who was sitting in his office on Wabash Avenue. And he decided simply to invite all the other people in his building to lunch. So they got to lunch and they had conversations about how important ethics was for business. Back in those days, there was a lot of corruption in business, unlike today. That's a joke. Um, and so these people, these business people, really believed that it was important to promote integrity and trust in business. So that was one of the founding principles. But they also realized that they liked each other. So actually, just socializing, getting together every week was a really good thing. And they began to rotate their meetings every week. That's where Rotary comes from. And then because they had so many resources, they decided to help the community. And the first project in Chicago was to build the first outdoor latrine. And you can imagine that back in those days, there was no place for people to go to the bathroom. And so men, we just don't care. We'll just go, anywhere. But women, you had to pay 5 cents to go use Carson Peary Scott's bathrooms. So Rotary clubs built the first bathroom, a public latrine. Anyway, this concept spread very quickly around the world again. And by 1910, they formed Rotary International. And there are now 30,000 Rotary clubs in about 198 countries with about 1.2 million members. And because we're so hugely diversified, we could work on the eradication of polio. And so I ran that program for 10 years, and I also managed all of their humanitarian programs. I'll tell you some stories about that later. And then after 10 years of that, I moved on and I became the executive director of a company called Glbl Chicago, which was a project of the MacArthur Foundation and the Chicago Community Trust. And there we were trying to promote Chicago as a globally competitive city, as a place to do your business here. And that went for about 4 years. We merged with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and it became the Global Chicago Center for the Chicago Council. And then I left and started my own business called World Resources Chicago. And I started teaching both here at Northwestern and at DePaul. And then I tried to finish my PhD, which I'd been working on since 1982. And it only took me 40 years to finish it, but in 2018, I did finish it at Northwestern after 4 tries, and I'll be happy to share those experiences with you at some point if you'd like. But I've been great fun teaching global health at Northwestern and then teaching in the public service program at DePaul. And so here I am. I still do lecturing for the Centers for Disease Control and do some consulting work with other organizations and still fortunately have a chance to talk to you guys. So that's about me. So we have a little while and I'd love to hear your stories. So what I'd like to hear from you is who are you and what are you doing in this class? What's your name? Where did you come from? Where did you do your high school or your undergraduate work? What was your major? What is your major now? And what would you like to get out of this course? And I'll take notes. So it's helpful for me to know what your interests, particularly in global health, might be, and that way that'll help me form more of the class. So any victims want to go first?
I can go first. Hello, I'm Kira. I'm a rising senior. I'm majoring in psychology and ALC, Asian languages and cultures, focusing Korea, and also with a minor in global health studies. I don't remember a lot of questions, but I guess for this class, I'm not super interested in like, the medical field and that kind of mostly interested in the research side of things. But I'm really interested in like cultural psychology and how things like interventions are tailored towards specific communities and different cultures. Um, I guess mostly stuff like that, just how tailoring towards specific cultures kind of affects outcomes and things like that.
So I assume you're interested in mental health issues.
Yes.
Okay. Mental health, as you can imagine, is one globally, one of the biggest challenges that we've got, and we're dealing with it extremely badly,
Yes.
literally everywhere. I don't know if you guys have heard some of the Chat GPT stories.
Yes. I've heard a few.
Right. So this is where a young person starts a dialogue with a bot and talks to them about their depression. And the bot is very sympathetic and a great listener. And then one day the young person says, well, I'm really feeling terrible today, and I think I'll just jump off a bridge. And the bot responds, well, congratulations on making a decision, and here are three bridges that you can jump from. And unfortunately, literally thousands of young people have committed suicide with the support and encouragement of these bots. And the organizations that support these groups, Meta and whatever, Google, etc., um, refuse to take any responsibility for this. There are some legal suits against them, but I don't think they're going to win. The other thing, of course, is you've got groups like, have all of you seen BetterHelp.com, where they say we've got thousands of therapists on standby, and you can get a relationship with some kind of a therapist? This is not good mental health. And so this is a very serious issue. We're going to have to find really some ways, and it is also very cultural, right? So we all view it very differently, but stigma obviously is a very big part of this, just like it is for HIV or even being pregnant these days, for God's sakes. So there's a lot of stigma involved in a lot of these issues, which is also very cultural. So yeah, there's a huge, even though you're not interested in the medical side, mental health is very medical. And more importantly, it's very cultural, and we got to figure out some new ways of dealing with that. So I really appreciate your interest, and it dovetails beautifully between all of your interests with Korea and with your psychology interests and with global health. They intersect very nicely. Korea, as you probably also know, has a very big problem with young people and mental health and suicides. And so this is a global phenomenon and an enigma that we've not been able to solve. Again, it also gets back to trust. Who do we trust? And so, yeah, thank you for that, Kara. This is of great interest. Anybody else?
I can go next. I'm Ella. I did my undergrad at Miami University in Ohio, where I majored in anthropology and public health. And I have come here to do my master's with a focus in global health. Some of my favorite things that I get to learn about. I have like a very side interest that I don't think I'll ever do anything with, of like anthropology and athletics and sort of healthcare within um like sports. I was a athlete at my last school, and I was a long distance runner, and a lot of my friends and I all always wondered, well, how do five of us have femur stress fractures right now, which is, I think, very interesting. But so just kind of figuring out like, such a weird problem. But my big loves are rural healthcare and looking at that, since I'm from a rural area myself, and I love infectious diseases, especially infectious diseases that have a huge stigma against having them. I just think they're such crazy beasts to try and attack from any angle, and yet there's so many people who are doing it every day, and I just think that's the coolest thing ever.
Any particular infectious diseases that concern you?
Um, I love like every one of them. I love like Hansen's disease or leprosy is always really, really fascinating to me because you really have to be so like not fully immunocompromised, but the length of exposure and the like that's where like and where nutrition can like I know you mentioned that can become fascinating because you have to be like you cannot have a strong immune system to become sick with it. And yet there are still, especially like for children, like children getting lifelong disabilities or blindness from a treatable, curable, preventable infectious disease that will also cost them to maybe be cast out of their homes or have all their friends never talk to them before, or if they're an adult, they'll lose their job. So that's something really, really interesting to me. How do you come at something like that that has so much in there where you can try to cure the disease, but for the people who have it, they've already lost so much they could might not ever get back. Um, that's what I love. I got the pleasure to do some work with the Sinai Infectious Disease Center on some mental health screenings for people with HIV, which was a lot of fun just looking at how often providers are actually screening for mental health, because that is another very stigmatized disease. So I think those are two of my favorites, but I also love like a classic, like I know you mentioned polio. Love polio to me is like a classic infectious disease. So is like tuberculosis. Those two are always interesting to me, or, and malaria. I think those are my big five.
Okay, well, we have a lot to discuss here. First of all, don't give up on the sports piece of it.
Oh, thanks. I
I
forgot I even said that.
another class called Achieving Global Impact Through Local Engagement. And the students have to actually pick an organization and volunteer someplace that addresses an issue of their choice. One of the groups of students that I was so pleased to have was the women lacrosse players at Northwestern, which you may know is probably, if not the top team, it's the second rate team in the country, and they have been for many, many years. These women understood the importance of sports in building women's confidence and how that changed their lives. And so these students began to collect helmets and equipment and all the sticks and balls and so forth. And they went around Chicago to high schools to teach high school women how to play lacrosse because they understood the power of it. Have you heard of a group called Girls on the Run? Right. So this is where usually young women from 8 to 12 are partnered with a young adult person, usually women from 18 and over, to run for an 8K race. And 8K is long enough that you just can't walk into it. It's 5 miles. You just can't just walk into it. You really need to prepare. So these young women work with their mentors and they practice until they achieve the 8K run, which is quite an accomplishment. So that has an enormous impact on how these young women see themselves, and it changes all of their relationships. On top of which, just the bonding between the mentor and the student is just huge, right? So that's just a great example. But sports is just a wonderful way of getting people to build up their confidence, particularly vulnerable people. So don't discount sports because there's actually a huge opportunity for you to work in that field, and especially in rural areas as well. So the rural areas, I'm flabbergasted. We're going to talk about this in the next part of the class, but the challenges that we're facing right now is that as you all know, that one big beautiful bill that was passed last year basically takes away almost all of the federal subsidies for rural hospitals and rural health care. So that people living in rural areas now have to go between 2 and 4 hours to get to even a secondary hospital, much less a primary care facility. So if they have a serious incident like a heart attack, we're going to be seeing some very serious increases in death rates. So what I don't understand is why a group like Northwestern or the University of Chicago hasn't, or the University of Michigan, hasn't partnered with rural health and do telemedicine or any other kind of programs that are joint. And so we will talk about the concept of shared responsibility in class. We need to think together as to how we can improve everybody's health, as opposed to just focusing on those who can pay for it. Because all of us benefit when everybody's health improves. So yes, I applaud that. Lastly, all of your infectious diseases. I mean, I hope you're a big immunization fan. So we have a lot to do about anti-vaxxers and misinformation, and this is a really big thing. But to give you a quick example is measles. And if you go even onto the CDC website and you look up measles, there's a lot of misinformation about measles, right? So have any of you had measles by any chance? Okay. So you've been vaccinated. A child will get a fever. It can be a high fever. So the CDC says 102. No, it can be as high as 105 or 107, which can lead to meningitis and encephalitis and all sorts of things. It can lead to hearing loss, a permanent hearing loss. It can lead to vision loss. It can lead to death. Now, fortunately, in this country, we have very good ICUs. So even though there have been thousands of children infected with measles, so far we've only had 3 deaths, knock on wood. But there's one of the other problems with measles is called a sequelae. It's the residual virus that's sort of hanging around that emerges about 10 years later. And children can get meningitis, a recurring meningitis, which will kill them. And so a 10-year-old will all of a sudden come down with this, which is the sequelae from a measles infection. And so, again, we need to be able to work on just helping people understand really what the consequences are of not getting immunized. And we'll talk more about that, but there's so much misinformation out there. It's really just very, very disturbing. So yeah, you've got a whole course just by yourself. And I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about will help you along the path, but your challenge is going to be to pick one on which to do a research paper. But those are all really great and important issues. I think we've got time for one more.
I could go. Oh,
Oh, it's okay, you can go.
okay. I'm studying mechanical engineering. I'll be a junior this next year, and I'm particularly interested in how engineering solutions can address health challenges. I like out of college, I want to work in like the med tech industry, so like medical devices. And one big reason that I decided to take this class is like in the engineering school, we have to come up with a theme and we have to take 7 courses that um like make up that theme. And in my theme description, it literally says like I want to improve my global communication and cultural awareness. So that second article about global competent engineers, like that really hit home for me is like the reason that I want to take this class. Um, I also I chose this one because in the spring I came back home to Milwaukee to help a renewal center. They were taking some teen leaders to a homeless shelter, and they just needed volunteers, so I volunteered there, and we got to work with their blood testing clinic. So they were testing for lead exposure in kids. And we got to teach the families how to properly filter their water, how to dispose of trash when they're like cleaning, to protect themselves from the lead exposure. And I just found that I'm like really passionate about learning about these disparities just in our city, and want to learn more about them like worldwide. Yeah.
Wow, well, I think you're going to find a lot of that kind of relationship throughout this course because there are a lot of engineering technical solutions. But you'll also understand and appreciate how important it is to deal with the cultural side. So the technology is very important, but so are the people. So like in polio, we'll talk about this. The vaccine was invented 30 years before Rotary got involved and talked about eradication. So for 30 years, there were 360,000 children a year that became paralyzed or died from polio because they couldn't figure out the human dimension of it. And so there's definitely a relationship. So when you think about water, it's also about just getting information out about it. So you're probably all aware of these forever chemicals that are in our water, which includes Lake Michigan. So I got into a rather big tiff with the mayor of Evanston because I said, why don't you install carbon filters onto your intake? Because there are about 5 million people that get water from Lake Michigan, and all the forever chemicals are cleansed through the activated charcoal filters. And his response was, well, we have to wait till the CDC sets the standard. And I said, but your own testing shows that you're way above what these accepted standards are, even today. So why not just add the activated charcoal filters, just as a great way of filtering the water? And he said, no, well, it's too complicated. We don't know how it'll relate to the other water filtration systems we've got, blah, 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 blah. So he's not doing it. But there are technical solutions if we can get people in. We'll also talk about the problem in Flint, Michigan with that water and all that happened there. So great. By the way, are you a member of the Women's Engineering Society, of the Society of Women Engineers?
Yeah, I'm not like super involved, but I do go to like a lot of their meetings.
There's also another group called Engineers for a Sustainable World.
Yeah, I haven't been involved with them.
Okay, and another group called Engineering World Health.
Hmm.
And anyway, there's just take a look at those because there's some great student organizations that can help promote what the work you're doing. Great.
Yeah.
Let's do the last one. Angela, let's get you, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, so I'm a rising senior majoring in statistics and minoring in global health. So I would say I'm interested in the intersection between data and global health, in particular, like how certain like demographic factors and like social factors can predict like certain health outcomes, as well as um, evaluating or analyzing like how effective a health policy or intervention is. And I would say in this class in particular, I'm interested in learning more about the global health structure and learning about the coordination efforts and um, the coordination efforts sort of behind different global epidemics. I want to have like a stronger grasp on that.
Great, in all of those areas. And the coordination, we'll talk a lot about that because that's clearly one of the gaps. Have you taken a course in epidemiology yet?
No, I haven't.
Um, Please talk to somebody in the global health department because as a senior next year, there is an MPH program that you can get into. But even if you don't get into the MPH program as a senior, you can also take a course in epidemiology, which I think is right up your alley because it's all about the use of demography and statistics about the distribution and determinants of illness. And you're absolutely right. We don't use our demographic data or our statistical data enough. And so the metrics that we use to evaluate the impact on health outcomes is very weak. We mostly look at inputs and not at outcomes. And so, for example, if we want to take a look at an educational program, we'll say, oh, we organized 200 seminars for community people, and 5,000 people came to all of our community education seminars. Well, that's not a good metric. Don't you want to, especially if you're offering pizza and beer to get people to come to the meeting? Don't you want to maybe do a test at the end of the meeting to see what people learned from the seminar? And maybe you want to do a prospective study and take a look, 6 months from now to see if any of that information changed their behaviors in any way, right? So you're absolutely right. We need to take a look at the metrics. What do we want to use to evaluate actual outcomes, not looking at just the inputs? And the outcomes are a much harder metric to study. So you're absolutely on the right track, and your use of epidemiology and statistics are very important. We're also going to talk about the difference between coincidence, correlation, and causality, right? Because we take a look at the relationship of vaccines and autism, and there's no correlation, and there's certainly coincidence, and people are taking coincidence as causality, and we can't seem to shake that. So someone like you that understands the difference can be enormously important in helping people understand and promote responsible journalism, right? You just can't take two things and put them together and say, well, just because they're here, that doesn't mean it's not a determinant. So great. Well, thank you. I'm glad we have someone like you to keep us honest. All right, it's 2:31. Why don't we take 15 minutes and why don't you come back at a quarter of? And please get something to eat, something to drink. I don't even mind if you eat during class. I mean, what's more important to me is that you, because the 3 hours is a long class, and I want to make sure you're well fed. All right, we'll see you in a bit. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hi there. So before we get into the next section, what do you guys think are the major challenges facing people's health today? And it could be anywhere in the world, local, global. But what do you think are the major challenges facing people's health?
I think one would definitely be like lack of information or like lack of like understanding about kind of like mental, not sorry, about like health things.
So there's two parts to that. One is people's inability to understand, and the other one is the information that's being provided. So you agree with the two sides of the coin?
Yes.
Um, well, let's just focus on that for a second. How do we help people learn to think critically about information they receive? If you have the answer to this, immediate A. Any of you can answer this. I mean, this is a really big challenge. How do we help? Think about yourself for a second. How do you ascertain if something is true or not? Like if I tell you that vaccines cause autism, do you believe that? Well, why not? What did you learn along the way that gets you to question the veracity of that statement? Bless you. I'll tell you a weird story on this one. Do any of you remember who John Edwards was? He ran for president probably before you were born. He was Democratic candidate for president. He was a litigating attorney, and I'm going to use a pejorative word, but this schmuck had an affair with somebody while he was running for president, while his wife was dying of cancer. This is not a nice guy. And the way he made his mark was that he thought that women who had regular natural childbirth were were provoking autism. That when a child passed through the vaginal canal during birth, the baby was deprived of oxygen and therefore it led to autism. And because he's a very good litigating attorney, he began to win the jury trials all across the country, winning millions of dollars. And of course, when he won all these cases, the obstetrician gynecologists, their malpractice insurance costs skyrocketed because they were losing these battles. And it was forcing them to turn to cesarean sections, which is why right now women are not only encouraged to have cesarean sections, but there are even cases where they're forced to have cesarean sections. And in some states like Wisconsin, California, the malpractice fees were so high that people just dropped out. So there are very few OB-GYNs in these states. But this is the difference between a coincidence and some real result. And yet, the medical practice has certainly responded to this litigation. So, how do we fight against something like that, where you're winning jury trials, but there's no evidence that this is the case? So you've raised a really important question because the misinformation campaign is actually quite well organized. There's a great book that I used in one of the other classes. It's called Science Under Siege. It's written by a guy named Michael Mann, Mann, and Peter Hotez, Hotez. And Peter Hotez is the virologist down in Baylor, and he's the head of infectious disease there. He's an amazing physician, but he's the one that really comes out and talks to the public about the importance of vaccinations. Michael Mann is responsible for one of the environmental challenges that we've got. He's got the UN to start these environmental climate change conferences. So the book talks about these kinds of challenges. They say that it's the environment, infectious disease, and deliberate, organized misinformation campaigns. And if you think about the petrochemical industry, the oil companies, if you think about them trying to prevent all the alternative energy sources, if you think about Robert Kennedy and all the way he's making money from promoting the fears of vaccines, and then you think about all of these huge, very wealthy people that are out there just promoting Fox News and everything else because fear is a great way of making money. So how do we overcome that kind of a misinformation campaign? So Kira, you've identified a really big thing. So not only do we not teach people to think critically anymore, we kind of teach them what to think, not how to think, right? And then the question is, how do we change that? Do we start with kids? What do we do with adults? And what do you think is one of the biggest factors in this misinformation campaign? Any of you, what do you think is one of the leading challenges that we have? So when you read something, what's the one issue that helps you decide whether you believe it or not? Do you trust the source?
That's what I was gonna say. Like, if I think that it's a trusted source, like a big news outlet or a journal or something like that. If it's a post on Instagram, like I'm probably gonna think I should probably fact check this later.
Yeah.
Which-
One of the things I'm finding I have to do now is I have to look at 2 or 3 sources that I trust. And if I can find consistency between the 3 sources, then I can trust the information, which is a big burden on me. But there is so much misinformation out there that it's really hard to differentiate, isn't it? And if you're just a consumer of popular information, if you're not looking at research, if you're just looking at Fox News or the New York Post or whatever social media, uh, do all of you know what social? I'm sure you do. What social influencers are? And so a lot of these companies are hiring, bless you, social influencers to promote certain viewpoints, and they have millions of followers. And do you think that the companies that allow them to put their videos on their sites like Instagram and TikTok and so forth, do you think that they bear any responsibility towards the content of what these people are promoting? Should they bear some responsibility? So this gets us back into public policy. So how do we make sure? But again, there's so much money in the misinformation side of things that it's very hard even to influence public policy in the right direction, right? All right, so what are some of the other issues? And Ella, you got a whole bunch of them.
I think, yeah, an obvious one is obviously like a lack of access, especially, well, like particularly in the US where we don't have like universal healthcare. and insurance is largely like employer based.
Yep. And when you say lack of access, what access to what?
Access to medical services, access to medical resources,
Okay.
or even access like to information as well.
That's what I was looking for. And it's got to be qualified information, right? You need to trust the information. Absolutely. Um, and you've got to also, I'll add one more. It's got to be affordable because you can have access, but you can't afford it. Or maybe affording it equals access, right? Um, this is a very, very challenging aspect. I mean, I was doing some community health clinics and we were doing finger sticks of people to check their blood sugar to see if they were diabetic or, how their blood sugar levels were working. And one woman, elderly woman, said, she said that she's diabetic. And I said, oh, do you also get your eyes checked every year? Because, if you're diabetic, the blood vessels in the back of your eyes can begin to leak and you can go blind. She says, no, I can't do that because I don't know. I can't go to the place that they tell me. And I said, well, where do they tell you to go? She said, oh, it's about 5 miles away and I have to take two buses to get there and I can't afford two buses and I can't afford the time. And I said, but you know that there's a hospital 1 block from here that offers free eye care so you could do an eye check. She says, no, I had no idea. 1 block. It turns out that the people at the desk where she was getting her information from didn't have any database on where were the clinics for people to go. So she just knew of that one place, which was 5 miles away. So for those of you that are interested in data collection, and I know, Angela, you're one of them, do any of you know how to use the maps, the ArcGIS mapping or Google Maps for healthcare? So we'll talk about this, but one of the really valuable tools is plotting the incidence of certain data points on a map. So wouldn't it be helpful to know where the free eye exams can be given on a map? Wouldn't it be helpful if you're a mother with 3 children and you arrive at a homeless shelter at 10 o'clock in a rainy, snowy night, and the manager says, I'm sorry, but you can't come in here. We don't let women and children in here. And the woman says, well, where do I go? Do you think that the manager can look up on a map where the homeless shelters are that take in women? I mean, you think this is actually a pretty easy thing to do, but health data maps are of enormous consequence. It's a great project, by the way. And for those of you that are really interested in global health, take a look at the ArcGIS systems, which is a very sophisticated mapping tool. And the Northwestern Library will teach you how to use it for free. And at Northwestern, you can get a copy of that software for free. But you can also just use Google Maps. But getting a visual identification of where these resources are and what insurance they take, I mean, this is a fairly simple thing to put together. You might think that the Chicago Department of Public Health might do that, but they don't. So that's great. Thank you for that one, Angela. I think you're absolutely correct about the information perspective. Ella, let's turn back to you for a second in terms of the infectious diseases. Give me the list of what you're petrified about.
Um, I just like no one wants to think about majorly antibiotic resistant diseases. One thing that particularly comes to mind is MDTB, multi-drug resistant, MDR-TB, um, tuberculosis, and then that circles back to like the lack of access where only people in wealthy countries will have access to the life-saving drugs that do exist and can help people. And people in low middle income countries will probably never, could possibly never have that opportunity in their lifetime to have access to those drugs. That's something that really comes to mind. Spillover, new diseases, and with like climate change, thinking about the borders of certain diseases where they have been contained previously, those going everywhere, which it's tough. I just heard the other day that mosquitoes are now in Iceland. Last great stronghold has fallen. Um, but also I think I was gonna mention this before we were doing such like I feel like these are very broad, but I was thinking about like over and under nutrition and the combination, especially in a lot of low and middle income countries. That was very fascinating to me because that if you are too far either way, you're going to be more susceptible to infectious diseases.
By the way, that's just called malnutrition, both over and under.
Mm, my bad. Sorry.
Oh, it's very important. A lot of people think that malnutrition is due to undernutrition, but you're quite correct, and it's also overnutrition. Let's just explore a couple of these. When it comes to Ebola, which is a big outbreak right now, are all of you concerned, or any of you concerned about Ebola coming to the United States? Why not? Pretty scary disease. Go ahead.
Um, I'm gonna say because the US is an extremely wealthy country, and if a case were to pop up here, no matter the state of our CDC currently, we would have extensive protocols in place to isolate and manage this case. And I also know that where Ebola is like the current outbreak, part of it is in like areas that are undergoing like civil war and things like that. And obviously, when a country is at war or when the area that's affected is at war, there's no real way to support a healthcare system and to quarantine people to help give them any type of healthcare tools, even just like a saline drip. So to
Yep.
me, it was like, where would that come to me?
So you're quite correct that our intensive care units are really fabulous. So that if somebody that does come here is very unlikely to die, like our measles cases, where they're like Bangladesh is going through a terrible crisis right now. Excuse me. Of infectious outbreaks, but they don't have the same kind of medical care, and so the numbers of deaths are outrageous. But there are certain questions that one wants to ask. So, for example, does anyone know how you determine if a person might be infectious with Ebola? If they have a temperature of over 102. So as soon as you've got a high fever, that's the first sign that you're infectious. If you don't have a high fever, even if you've been exposed, you're not infectious. So in 2016, they started alerting all of the emergency rooms across the country about looking for people with high fevers. And if you find somebody with a high fever, to ask one question. Anybody know what that question might be? Have you traveled out of the country in the last 2 weeks? So there was a man who went to a Dallas emergency room with a very high fever. And what was the one question they did not ask him? And he had just come back from Liberia, and he had Ebola, and he died. And so preparedness, we'll talk a lot about preparedness in this class. Fear is so huge that what's the first thing we did in this country right now was we closed our airports to anybody coming from these countries. In fact, any American who's ill with Ebola or even with a high fever is not allowed to come into the United States. They have to go to the Czech Republic or Uganda or Kenya. And those countries are not happy to receive our sick people. Do you think that's an appropriate response to close our borders to people that come from those countries? Is that a way of protecting ourselves? So it's a knee-jerk reaction because you think, okay, if the country like Central African Republic or DR Congo, they have a lot of Ebola, just don't allow anybody in here. The problem is if somebody does come in through regular channels, through an airport, for example, let's say they arrived in Washington or New Jersey or New York, you could take their temperature. And you could, even before they get on their plane, you could take their temperature. And certainly if they get off the plane, you can take their temperature. And you can immediately put them into quarantine if that was the case. If we close the airports and don't let people travel, then guess what happens? They go to a neighboring country and fly to a third country like Mexico City and then come in from Mexico City. So we lose track of the ability to monitor them. And so if you really want to have a robust surveillance system, you want to make sure that people are allowed to travel and that we can have a surveillance system in place. The one thing that the current administration has done, unfortunately, is dismantle our global surveillance system. We're no longer working with the World Health Organization, although they are doing a little bit now with Ebola. Let me just turn for a quick second. Did any of you read the article about Ebola in Liberia? And what were some of the lessons that you took away from that article? Pretty sobering article, isn't it? What were some of the lessons that you took away from that article?
I think the biggest one was kind of what we already talked about is like, how do you choose what information to believe? And I think that became very prevalent because like when information came from their government, they already distrusted their government. So even though it was something so serious that like people were literally dying and bodies were being left in the street, they still thought it was just some hoax and they just like refused to believe like they needed the quarantining or that it wasn't just some big conspiracy to get more foreign aid.
Could you believe that? I mean, when I first read that, it knocked my socks off. And actually, the president is a fairly responsible, trusted person. But they actually thought that she was creating this so that the foreign agencies would give them more money that she could steal. Holy cow. And it wasn't just her, obviously, it was the entire government, absolutely. So there were two organizations working in Liberia at the time. One was called Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. The other one was called Samaritan's Purse. And both of these organizations, when they come into a country, they set up independent operations. So they bring in, they can hire local physicians and nurses and healthcare workers, but they bring in some expatriates, but they do not integrate with the national health systems. And so when the first cases of Ebola came out, the Liberians thought of Haiti when the UN forces had a problem with their sanitation and they infected the country with cholera because of a lack of sanitation. And 12,000 people died of cholera because of this one person that came in, one soldier. And now cholera is endemic to Haiti. There had never been any Ebola in West Africa before. And so the first thing they thought of was, oh my God, there must have been some expatriate, some foreigner that brought this in. So these two organizations that were not integrating with the local medical facilities were burned. Fortunately, nobody was killed. But that just again goes to a lack of trust about an organization and how important it is to work together with the local authorities. Does anybody remember from the article what was the major source of infection for people that were mostly dying of Ebola? Besides the healthcare workers.
Funerals?
Sorry?
Was it funerals?
Exactly. And do you remember the funeral practices which would provoke such an infection?
It was washing the body of your loved one?
Right. So the bodies in West Africa and Liberia, they have to be buried within 48 hours. And in order to prepare the body for burial, it's not just cleaning the outside, but you have to take out all the internal organs so that you can just bury the body without the internal organs. And of course, that's where all the Ebola resides, right? So the healthcare workers, have you all seen that? They're given personal protective equipment. Have you all seen pictures of it? They've got, hoods and all this great latex equipment and gloves and boots, and Clorox is sprayed all over them. Um, but the families were not taught initially how to clean the bodies, and they were furious at the healthcare workers that were removing the bodies from the families and not letting the families participate in the burial, which only exacerbated their mistrust of these healthcare workers. Until finally somebody realized maybe we should teach them how to clean the bodies in a protected way, right? And we give them personal protective equipment, give them Clorox, and that began to reduce the infection. But that took actually a couple of years before that kind of trust built up. By the way, in the middle of the epidemic in August of 2016, the Monrovia National Hospital ran out of latex gloves. Now, I couldn't imagine such a thing because if you think of USAID and the UNICEF and the British agency DFID and the Norwegians and the Germans and everybody providing prophylactic supplies, all this equipment, latex gloves and so forth, how could the supply chain have broken down? But it did. And so people were very vulnerable for a few months before they could reestablish the supply chain. Now, does anybody know what the number one commodity export of Liberia is? Rubber. So Goodyear tires, Goodrich, all of this, they export the rubber and they manufacture tires. And what is all this latex equipment made of? Rubber. So my question is, why didn't USAID or any one of these other agencies 20 years ago, why didn't they build a condom manufacturing facility in Liberia where the people could learn good manufacturing practices? It's not highly technical, but you can imagine you've got to be pretty careful about the condoms. So there's got to be a very, low incidence of mistakes. And once you've got a factory going for 20 years and you're producing a lot of condoms that could be sold all over Africa, you could convert that facility to producing protective equipment. Why don't we invest in these countries in terms of development aid instead of using all of our development aid to buy latex gloves from Pennsylvania and ship them to Liberia? So you can understand there's a lot of distrust about foreign aid and who benefits from it by these folks. So the trust, even WHO failed miserably. The African Regional Office was terrible. It did not recognize Ebola for the first year. Well, that just degrades the trust in the World Health Organization. So there was a real cascading effect of this problem. And it's slowly been restored. And in fact, that's what helped get rid of the outbreak in Liberia. Eventually, trust was restored, not at the national level, but through a tremendous effort at local communities throughout the entire country, where people learned how to protect themselves with the funeral practices and learned looking for symptoms and began to quarantine people, etc., by themselves. So that article. Actually, before I read that article, I had no idea that people could so distrust their government. And remember, this is before our COVID experience here. What do you guys think about after the COVID experience? Do you trust our government in the same way? Or is it specific to certain administrations? So when they have COVID vaccines, and you guys are in a very strange age group because you are not supported by insurance because the US government does not recognize that the vaccines are necessary for you guys. But what do you think, just on a personal basis? Do you think that the COVID vaccine is something that you should get in September, October, together with the flu shot? So why do you think different? Because you're going to have to pay for it, right? You're not going to get, your insurance is not going to pay for it. They probably will pay for flu, but not COVID. Are you willing to pay the difference? And same thing with the RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. Why should you be concerned at your age about a COVID infection? It's not like a short-term flu, is it? There are long-term consequences, especially respiratory, and it affects your arteries pretty considerably in ways that you probably don't know about for years to come. So anyway, these are all part of the issues. By the way, Ella, you are going to truly love this book about Paul Farmer because one of the things that Farmer and Jim Kim did was change the world's opinion of multiple drug resistant tuberculosis. It's an extraordinary story, and you will see. One of the other things that I'd like you all to remember is how important individuals are, how important you are to health, not only for local people and the people you immediately relate to, but also in terms of potentially making an impact on the world. So I told you about this guy, Henri Dunant, who started the YMCA and then started the International Committee of the Red Cross. Um, but do you remember a woman named Florence Nightingale? She was the nurse who started the Red Cross in Great Britain because she saw the disasters in the war in the Crimea. And do any of you remember the name of the woman, Clara Barton? She was the nurse in the Civil War that also started the Red Cross because she saw how the prisoners were treated. So I just want to we'll talk a lot more about individuals in the course of this quarter. Individuals can make an enormous difference, and it really does all start with you. It's what you believe and how you're able to convince other people of what you believe in. And so even if it's just changing the opinion of one person and protecting their life, that's huge. Aside, of course, from protecting your own life. And so that's just really one of those important lessons to learn. So what about that article about what was it? Let's see, gosh. The Doomsday Strain, the article in the New Yorker. Does this is an interesting problem, right? So what is that article about? Do you remember this is primarily about bushmeat, right, in Africa? What is bushmeat and why is that a problem for global health?
It is like non-farmed meat, as far as I'm concerned. Um, so like anything you go out and it's wild that you catch. And it's bad because you cannot expect people to just stop eating it because then you're taking away a massive part of their food source. But when people do eat it, they ex put themselves at a very high risk to be part of a spillover event where something that was contained within that animal population has now infected a person, and maybe it can now infect the person next to them and become something really bad.
why are we concerned about bushmeat in particular? So what's the concern about going after some of this wild animals? And by the way, we're talking about monkeys and wild pigs and bats and birds and some of the big game too, like elephants and zebras and all kinds of stuff. Um, we also have a problem in this country. What do we call bushmeat in this country, in the United States?
Probably deer.
Right, but there's a generic word for it.
Oh,
Uh, Game meat, right? So deer obviously is one. What are some other game meats that you might eat?
like moose or alligator.
Yeah, keep going. There's a whole bunch of them,
Yeah. Frogs.
right? Well, you're clearly from the rural area, so you no, either that or you watch a lot of those television stories. Yeah, but birds, wild ducks, geese. We've got a bird flu situation right now, right? So actually eating and coming in contact with certain birds could also facilitate what you just said. It's getting infected, and then there might be a mutation. So right now it's mostly just bird to bird transmission, but we have seen cases of bird to human transmission. And what we have not seen yet is human to human transmission, but that's part of that cycle that we're watching. So yeah, bear, antelope. So even in the United States, we eat a lot of game meat. So part of the problem, particularly in parts of Africa, is that as populations grow and as there's more sort of urban and rural development, it infringes on these forest areas. And not only it drives the animals further and further into the bush, but it also then drives the hunters further and further into the bush. So now people are coming into contact with pathogens that humans have never encountered before. So there's no natural immunity over a course of generations to some of these pathogens that live really in the wild. We've certainly seen that in China with the collection of bats and civet cats and a whole bunch of other animals. Um, and the animals themselves are now infected in different ways, but they may have been infected for years because a lot of them have antibodies to some of these diseases, which humans don't. Now, bushmeat is hard. How do you get a woman? This is in the story, right? How do you get a woman who needs to feed her family? Exactly as Ella says. How do you get a woman if she comes across a dead monkey in the middle of the forest? How do you get her to leave the monkey alone? Because you don't know how the monkey died.
I guess the only real way to do it would be to provide like not only like a different like a different solution, but like a better solution. And also it would have to come like as easily as just finding it on the ground.
Which, in the case of the article, the woman needs to feed her family. And the global health part of this is that we also import primates and other animals from Africa for research. And you've probably seen this on television. Our Customs and Border Patrol people have a very serious challenge of finding people from Africa or Asia or whatever part of the world bringing these bush meat in their suitcases because all of their relatives in this country really miss eating that local food. And so it's quite illegal to bring it in. I mean, including elephant and all sorts of wild animals from around the world. But that's a big problem in terms of global health is how do we control that? So one of the links that I've put into the on course canvas is an organization called CIDRAP. And we'll read a little bit about this next week. A guy named oh gosh, Michael, I'm just forgetting his name right now. Hang on one second. Gosh, Michael Osterholm. Thank you. Michael Osterholm is a professor of medicine and infectious disease at the University of Minnesota. And he's the chair of this organization called CIDRAP that monitors infectious disease that's traveling around the world. And so, Ella, you did talk about deer. Do you know what the problem with deer is in the United States?
Just read about it, chronic wasting disease.
Which is another form of this spongiform encephalopathy. It's very similar to mad cow disease or uh, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. It creates big holes in the brain. And so the animals suffer terribly. You'll see them sort of walking around listlessly. It affects moose, it affects deer. And the problem, of course, is if a hunter kills an infected deer, which is mostly in the northern areas like Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, and so forth, Wyoming. If somebody, a human, consumes that infected deer anywhere in the body, not just the brain, but primarily the brain, it's a prion disease. And so they will also become infected. So what Michael Osterholm is promoting to hunters is that when you kill a deer, you have to take either the head or a sample of the brain immediately to a research lab and have it tested for this wasting disease. And if the deer is found to be infected, you have to destroy it. And by the way, it's almost impossible to destroy prions. So how you dispose of these heads is another major concern. You can't burn it. You have to dispose of it in some other ways. But do you think hunters are going to listen to that warning? So this is part of the challenge. So I had a class before. What do you think we might be able to do to help hunters? If you were a public health department commissioner, what might you do to help hunters comply with that request? How would you make it easier for the hunter to test their animal?
I would say like being able to test it should be like readily accessible, and it should be free. I don't know if there's like something portable that they could carry around and test it, but like that would be what would like ideal.
Absolutely. So you think that maybe a school of public health could come up with a test for this prion disease that might actually be deployed in the field. That would be an excellent response. Keep going. What are some other ones? And you're right about being free. How would you make it more rapid? I mean, the technology idea is great, but if we don't have a quick, rapid field test, what else could we do?
Maybe maybe some sort of like reward system.
That's a very good idea. Yep, some incentive. And if you turn in a head that's infected, you get compensated for the deer. That's a good one. How many of you know about the Forest Service, the park rangers that are deployed? I mean, by the way, that's a great job. If you ever want to like be in the wilderness, go work for the U.S. Forest Service. I mean, it's just being a park ranger or just a ranger is phenomenal job. But do you think that the state could deploy? So if a hunter kills a deer, they can call up the Forest Service and say, "Could you please dispatch an officer here immediately?" And the officer will take the sample of the brain. The officer will bring it to the lab for testing, and the officer will inform the hunter within 24 hours if the deer is okay to eat. Would that be another appropriate deployment of services? So I like the way you're beginning to think about this. We have to help people find easier ways to comply because I don't think, do you think that they believe if they haven't seen the deer, seriously wandering around and looking awful, looking sick, how would they know? And so if they don't know, they don't care. By the way, it's also infecting fish so that the trout in some of the Colorado rivers and streams also has chronic wasting disease. I don't quite understand how they get infected, but that's apparently another part of the problem. So these are very serious issues. But you can understand now how we're approaching the thinking about helping people trust the source of information, and then how can we help them more easily comply with whatever intervention we're proposing. Let's see. All right, so those are the three, and then I'm glad, Paulina, that you like the article on the globally competent engineer, because yes, cultural sensitivity is of utmost importance to people. All right, let me turn now very quickly. Any comments about the readings so far? Are these things that seem interesting to you guys? Okay. And it's especially helpful to begin to think, well, what would you do in a similar situation like this? Because that's what we're in. All right, so I'm going to share. There we go. Okay, so when it comes to some other expectations, part of our big challenge is to deal with the difference between myths and realities. And I would like to nominate all of you as myth busters. So if someone says to you, oh, I'm feeling so dehydrated, I need to drink Gatorade, what would you say to them? Is Gatorade a good fluid if you're feeling a little thirsty?
Yeah, I'd probably ask if they were like really sweaty today.
Okay, really sweaty. Do you know how much electrolytes and sugar is in Gatorade?
Mm-hmm.
So unless you're a football player out in the 85-degree heat with a 3-hour practice, you're not going to lose enough fluids or electrolytes to need Gatorade. It is truly overkill. What other fluids do they offer now besides Gatorade? Do you guys drink smart water? Oh, good for you guys. So what do you guys drink when you're thirsty?
I just carry my water bottle and like usually from like a bubbler, like other public water fountains.
Okay. I will send you an article on water filtration systems that you can use in your whole house or that you can use in a pitcher that does have an activated charcoal filter. Some of them, they say that they're filtering, but to get rid of the forever chemicals in particular. The other thing, of course, in public water, as good as it is, do you all know the problem with the micropharmaceuticals in the water? So you know that every time you urinate, and if you're taking birth control pills or you're taking antibiotics or you're taking whatever, it all gets flushed down into the toilet and it goes through the water cleaning system, but it ultimately ends up in Lake Michigan, and our filtration systems do not filter out micropharmaceuticals. So all of us are consuming not massive amounts, micro doses of estrogen and acetaminophen and all sorts of other chemicals that are affecting our bodies in ways that we don't know. So getting a water filter to filter any kind of water is really a good idea. But then carrying it around yourself, Pauline, is a great idea. By the way, you probably realize that I no longer teach, that I just rant because I'm angry at so many things. So I thought of changing the name of my course many years ago to Doom and Gloom with Diamond. But as you'll probably notice, a lot of optimism goes through all of this because these are all problems to be solved. And that's where I'm confident that you guys will be part of these solutions. But the doom and gloom part is quite serious, and we do have to take these threats and challenges seriously. But we also have a commitment and I think even a personal obligation, not only for ourselves and our families, to figure out appropriate solutions. And Paulina, this is one of my big, I love promoting this, but it's the sustainable implementation of appropriate technology. And it's really important for all of us to figure out how to sort these things out for ourselves and for our loved ones, and then for the community at large. So, um, do you think I should change the course of doom and gloom with Diamond? Just let me know. But I hope that my spirit of optimism will come through. It usually does. But if I go too far the other side, let me know, because I really don't want to leave you guys depressed and, having some mental health issues as a result of this course. Because there are solutions to all of these things. All right. I want you to be mythbusters. There are alternatives to Gatorade, including just basically putting a little salt and sugar in your water, just to drink, but even just basic hydration is enough. How do we promote reliable, accurate information and purposeful communication? So if somebody comes up to you and asks you a question that you don't have an answer for, there is no problem in simply saying, I don't know, let me look it up. And I hope you will keep a list of reliable sources that you trust to look up an answer so that you can share purposeful communication with whoever's asking you the question. We are going to be talking about what I call the 5 C's, which help with creating coordination and collaboration and partnerships. So it's convergence of interests, cooperation, coordination, communication of interests, and the 5th C is a catalyst. And as you'll see, that I think all of you are these catalysts that make it happen. And finally, the recognition that global health is a human as well as a medical challenge, that some of the solutions are not just technological, but they're also cultural. And we have to find a way of promoting trust and getting the right solutions to people, exactly as you guys have been saying, in a way that's affordable, that's trustworthy, that's cultural competent, that's linguistically sensitive, and that people can consume appropriately. So that's where the anthropologist is in all of you, that we've got to find ways that looking at health and separating health from health care. Health is what people have as their asset. Health care is only one tool that people have to manage their health. And frequently we just combine the two. We just think that health care is synonymous with health, and it isn't. And so our job is to help people better manage their health. So here's the 5 C's to building healthy coalitions. It's a 3-sector approach that brings together the public sector, the private sector, and civil society. So what's the public sector? What's an example of a public sector organization? So the public sector is government. It could be local city government, it could be county government, it could be state government, it can be national government. It can also be intergovernmental. So groups like the World Health Organization is an example of an intergovernmental organization, as is UNICEF or the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The Centers for Disease Control is another governmental, but it's a national governmental organization, as is our Department of Health and Human Services. And at the local level, we have the Evanston Department of Public Health, we have the Cook County Department of Public Health, and we have the Illinois Department of Public Health. So there are a lot of these governmental institutions. What's the private sector?
I think those are companies that are like for profit. So like private hospitals, like pharmaceutical companies?
Absolutely. Insurance companies. There are a lot of consulting groups that do a lot of advice and counsel that you could hire for healthcare. So yes, the private sector is all of those kinds of groups. And then what's meant by civil society sector? So these would be your nonprofit organizations or your tax exempt organizations or charitable organizations. There's a lot of alphabet soup in this. So you probably heard of PVO, private voluntary organizations, or NGO, non-governmental organizations, or my favorite one is GONGO, which is a government organized non-governmental organization. Holy cow. Yes, but they exist, a governmental organized non-governmental organization. You got to watch out for those, but that's another example. Um, so the important thing is that the problems that we're trying to address are so big that they're so much larger than any one of these sectors can handle by themselves. So the only real potential solutions is when we can get these three sectors to cooperate and coordinate and collaborate. Otherwise, the resources get sort of skewed all over the place and there's no big real effect. So the five C's are the first is convergence. How do we find an issue that the two of us share in common? And it sounds pretty easy, but it's actually fairly difficult. Funny thing is, we'll talk about this with polio, but the one issue that's common to almost everybody in the world is people's love for their children. So when we talk about people's love for their children, there's an immediate convergence of interests. Now, I'll give you some funny examples, and this actually happens more with women than with men. But when two women, usually women, meet each other for the first time, what do you guys sometimes do that creates immediate convergence, a bond between you? It's a funny kind of thing that a lot of women do.
The only thing I can think of is like give them a compliment.
Ah, like what?
Usually either like, oh my God, I love your hair, or like, oh my gosh, I love your outfit. I do that a lot.
No, that's absolutely correct. Men don't do that so easily. I think if we do it at all, it'll be about politics or sports or something. But women do it very easily, and it immediately gives you a bond that you can build on for other things. It's a remarkable thing. But finding an interest that we both have in common for an organization should be easy, but it's not. But if you can find one, that's the biggest thing, first of all. So the second thing is cooperation. What do we mean by cooperation? And it doesn't happen easily. Isn't it a willingness to want to work with some other group? It's a recognition that the problem is so big that maybe we do need to find a partner to help us. And to do that, we need to agree to cooperate. And that's a big problem because there's not a lot of experience now that people have in cooperation. It's all about me in my organization. And if we do decide to cooperate, then we need to coordinate because some of you have different resources than I have. And it's a question of, can you do some things better than me? And can I do some things better than you so that we can coordinate and share our resources more appropriately? And if we agree with these three things, then the next thing we need to do is learn how to communicate effectively. And as you probably well know, like the difference between doctors and nurses, we have different languages and we have to learn how to communicate in a similar language. Some of it's called interprofessional communication. But we need to work at developing a language and content that we all share together so that when we talk, we're talking on the same wavelength. But to do all of this requires a catalyst, some group or person that can purposefully put these things together. And in polio eradication, as we're going to find out later on, Rotary International was that catalyst. But I want you guys to think of yourselves as that catalyst, because now that you understand this, and we'll talk more about it, but now that you understand it, you can be the ones to promote this kind of collaboration and partnerships, because it does not come easily to most people. What do you think people are afraid of when we talk about cooperation? Why are people reluctant to cooperate? And organizations especially. So when it comes to finances, do you think that some organizations are concerned that there's just one pie, and that if I share with somebody else, I'm going to get a smaller slice of that pie? The reality is, when you cooperate, there's a synergy involved, and the pie actually gets bigger. And in some cases, even new pies are created. But you're right, people just are fearful of losing money. What about recognition? Do you think that if we work together with somebody else, that they might steal all the recognition and grab the credit? So we're going to see that it really shouldn't matter who gets the credit as long as we have an outcome that is what we're looking for. But you're right, these are all barriers that people have. The more that we do this, the easier it becomes and the more beneficial that you can see that it works. We'll talk a lot more about that. But so what is global health and why does it matter? So the purpose of global health systems is to improve the quality of people's lives, reduce the burdens of disease and poverty, and provide access to responsive health care for all. Epidemiology is the study of the distribution and determinants of disease frequency in humans. When you talk about global health, epidemiology is absolutely one of the most essential tools. For all the things that you guys have said, demography really matters. The distribution of health status in terms of age, sex, race, geography, and it's the application of demography to the study of health and disease. And that's why mapping is also so important, because you need to see visually where things are, both in terms of the problems like infectious outbreaks, but also in terms of resources. I believe that global health is a shared responsibility and needs good, strong partnerships between public, private, civil society sectors and individuals. So, for example, take a look at Chicago. Just because the University of Chicago is on the south side, does that mean that they are responsible for taking care of all the people on the south side of Chicago, which is a huge area? While Northwestern University, their medical center is in Streeterville. How many poor people live in Streeterville? So why is it not considered a shared responsibility among all the hospitals in Chicago to help all the people of Chicago? Why doesn't the mayor just pull together all these different resources and say, we need to promote the health of all the people of Chicago. We need to make Chicago a healthier city. So there are 4 challenges that I think need to be addressed to improve the world's health in the 21st century. We need to greatly reduce the burden of excess mortality and morbidity, particularly suffered by the poor. We need to counter potential threats to health resulting from economic crises, unhealthy environments, and risky behaviors. We need to develop much more effective health systems, and to follow Ella, particularly in rural areas or any kind of vulnerable areas. And we need to invest in expanding the knowledge base, which means not only disseminating information, but also investing in research. The fact that our government just now is reducing the support to the National Institutes of Health is just incredible. You all know that there's a new vaccine that's one of these messenger RNA vaccines that helps potentially cure people of pancreatic cancer. And so the government has withdrawn federal support to continue that research. I mean, some of this stuff just does not make sense, but this is where our fight really has to continue. So, definitions. Now, this is where I just want you guys to be careful about, about the way that you use certain terms. And this is just in order to promote credibility. So epidemiology, as we said, is the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states or events in specific populations and the application of this study to the control of health problems. The distribution is the frequency and patterns of health events in a population. The determinants are the causes and other underlying and influential factors that affect the incidence of disease and other health-related events. A health-related event can be communicable, both endemic and non-endemic or episodic, and non-communicable. And we'll talk later about the quadruple burden of disease. A specified population is not just the health of individuals, but the occurrence and control of disease and focus on identification of the source and program response for intervention and control. So we can't simply talk about the population of Chicago, because there is no one population of Chicago, right? We've got millions of individuals and hundreds of, or 200 different cultural and ethnic groups in Chicago, and a variety of racial groups, and 77 discrete communities. So when we look at the distribution of disease in a population, we have to define that population group. Now, these next ones are very important in terms of your use of the terms. When we talk about control, we're talking about reducing the incidence of a disease. So, giving a vaccine or giving some kind of therapeutic response, like with measles, whatever we can do to reduce the incidence, then that's what it means to control a disease. Elimination is when we can reduce the incidence of disease to zero in a specific population or specific geographical area. But frequently, people are using the term eradication instead of control or elimination. And eradication is a very challenging technical term. It means the reduction of the incidence of a disease to zero throughout the entire world and the elimination of that pathogen from the environment. So far, only one disease has been eradicated, and that's smallpox. And there are currently only two diseases that are targeted for eradication. One is polio, and the other is guinea worm. We'll talk more about that. But I go crazy when I listen to these anchor people on news broadcasts, and they say, yes, we're doing a measles eradication program. I go furious. Measles cannot be eradicated. It can be controlled. It can even be eliminated. It cannot be eradicated. So every time I hear that, I write a letter to the editor and all the various people there. I never get a response, and they never change their language. But it doesn't stop me from expressing my outrage at their inappropriate use of their terms. So we're going to talk about incidence. And incidence is the number of new occurrences of a condition or a disease in a specific population over a period of time. The incidence rate uses new cases in the numerator, and individuals with a history or of a condition are not included. It's a new case. The denominator for incident rates is the population at risk. So it's the numbers of new cases divided by the population at risk during a specified time period, which is usually 1 year. It's often expressed as X number of cases per given population base, usually at the 10,000 population or 100,000 population. The difference between incidence and prevalence, the prevalence is the measure of a condition in a population at a given point in time. And prevalence can be measured over a period of time, like a year, but the second type of prevalence is called period prevalence. It's a combination of both point prevalence, which is at a particular point in time, or over a period of a year. Period prevalence is the most common measure of prevalence. So prevalence data provides an indication of the extent of a condition and may have implications to the provision of services needed in a community. Both measures of prevalence are proportions, and as such, they are dimensionless and should not be described as rates. So the formula is the number of existing cases over the population at risk during a specified time period. Now, prevalence is a useful parameter when talking about long-lasting infections like HIV, but incidence is much more useful when talking about infections of short durations like chickenpox. And you'll see this, the short-term incidence will peak, will spike, and then decline, whereas prevalence is more of a permanent kind of condition. So, trusted resources, and I hope you'll just begin to gather your own set of websites where you can turn to for good information about diseases or about different information. I highly recommend the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. You can get that for free. It's just called the MMWR from the CDC. This is an example of one of these reports from the coronavirus. I still would encourage you to look at the cdc.gov, but I have to tell you that you can only look at that site now with a little bit of skepticism. You can no longer trust the information in the CDC site. You have to get it confirmed from some other sites as well. Even their guidance documents are no longer appropriate because they're very inconsistent and they're very political. There is Johns Hopkins, which has actually it's got a whole resource center. There is the Kaiser Family Foundation, there's WebMD, there's a lot of other groups, but I hope you'll begin to just search for it. Now, some of you have taken David's course, Wozniak's course in the epidemiology and of disaster response. He is a trained epidemic intelligence officer. So when you finish your PhD or your MD, please take a look at the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And for those of you that are interested in epidemiology, this is the gold standard for epidemiologists. Now, they did cancel actually the March 2025. The March 2026 is now closed, but when you look at it for next year, take a look at the application. It'll be a few more years before you can apply, but this is a 2-year program, and it's the gold standard for an epidemiologist. So here's just a bunch of other sites that you can go to for a variety of, and I really encourage you guys to come up with your own sites. This is just some places that I go to, but please look at your own. These are just a bunch of words that I think are helpful to you. I'm not going to go through them, but you might want to add to your list of terms that are useful in global health. And we'll get a lot more into some of these during the course of the quarter. So are all of you aware of the income inequality that's taking place in the world today, where the top 0.1% owns about 50% of the resources in the United States? And when you take a look at the bottom 50% of this country, or of the world for that matter, they own less than 1/10 of all the resources. So there's clearly a skewed income distribution, and this has enormous impact on philanthropy, on employment, on wages, and on the quality of life for the vast majority of people. And I'm sure you're all aware, we can talk about that for a second, but I'm sure you're all aware right now that even middle-class people in the United States are beginning to suffer because wages are not keeping pace with inflation. A lot of people are trying to maintain their standard of living by using credit cards. And slowly their credit cards are going to be maxed out. And then even middle-class people are not going to have enough resources. So if any of you have volunteered at food pantries in the last few months, you're going to be seeing a lot more, even middle-class people coming to the food pantries for supplemental nutrition. And just as of May 1st, the government has stopped providing SNAP benefits. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program used to be called food stamps. And so even Medicaid patients are now going to be required to work. And they've also stopped that Head Start program for children under 5. So we are going to be seeing a lot more malnutrition and hungry people, which is putting a huge burden on our food pantries. If you have never volunteered for the Greater Chicago Food Depository, I highly recommend it, or any food pantry for that matter. They can always use your support, even local ones, wherever you are in the country. It's just a great exercise, and it's a wonderful way to feel like you're just participating in something. But I'm afraid that the demands for food and medical care are going to increase rather dramatically. And this is all due to the income distribution problems that we're seeing. Have any of you become aware of any of these types of issues? I know, Ella, you're from the rural area, but you're going to begin to hear that patients, like including your family members, might not be able to go any longer to the local health clinic, and especially if they have a heart condition, they may have to go 2 to 4 hours to a regional hospital to get help, which is also like a death sentence. So we're going to be seeing a lot of issues like that. Have all of you heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? All right. So only number 3 deals specifically with health, but the World Health Organization did a brilliant thing, and they said that all 17 actually relate to health in different ways. And I think that's a really important way to look at this. Health is not simply about health care, but it is about water and the environment and relationships and access to all sorts of other resources, education, etc. So the goal is to empower local organizations to strengthen their capacity to address their own problems, not to come and solve their problems for them. We're going to talk about building communities from the inside out, which is an asset-based approach to community development. We're going to recognize all stakeholders to ensure that there's no exploitation or inappropriate advantage. And hopefully we will all engage all stakeholders in a coordinated effort. There is an abundance of financial, human, and other resources within each sector that can be leveraged with those of the other sectors. After the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, do any of you know how many organizations, NGOs, went into Haiti to help in 2010? Take a wild guess. Just throw out some numbers. Yeah, 3. I mean, really throw out some wild numbers.
200.
Ooh, 529.
12,000.
Ooh.
And how many of those organizations do you think really made an impact that benefited the people of Haiti rather than themselves?
Not many.
And
26.
26, something like that, right? And when they left, how many really left a bigger impact and a stronger Haiti as a result? And the answer, of course, is not very many. So groups like Oxfam and a few other organizations got together and they came up with what they call the NGO Code of Conduct. So when you're going to come into another country to help, don't pay the local people at an international rate, because you're then going to destroy the ability of the local economy to support them. Don't come in and replace existing organizations because you can pay more money for rent than they can. You've got to think about building and strengthening local organizations rather than replacing them. And so this is just a very important lesson to learn. And for those of you that want to take the time, this is the ngocodeofconduct.org. There is a sort of a whole promotional brochure about this. Anyway, here's some other key documents that I think are very important. But the most important thing, and this is one of my biggest concerns, is a decline in humanitarianism. There's a real decline of our concern for other people. And I mean, not only even our family members. People are more concerned only with themselves, and organizations are mostly concerned only with themselves, and governments are concerned only with themselves. How do we promote the importance of caring for other people besides ourselves? What is the benefit to us for helping other people do better? And you guys wouldn't be in this program if you didn't have that kind of compassion and that kind of humanitarianism. I know that you want to make the world a better place. It's one of the reasons I love teaching global health, because you are the future. You think differently, you feel differently. And the question is, how do we take your approach to caring for other people and helping other people somehow extend that same courtesy to others? You know, in Iran, we bombed a school by accident and we killed 150 children. And we see stories like this all the time in the world. Not only are we not apologizing for that, we're not even recognizing that we were responsible. I think part of accountability is taking responsibility even when you have a problem. And I'll give you one last quick lesson. Having a problem is not a problem unless you don't address it. So any problem, I mean, some of the worst problems in the world I've had to deal with, they can be resolved, and they can also be resolved in a way that can prevent it from happening in future if you take the time to address it properly, recognizing the accountability you might have for whatever the problem was. Having a problem is not a problem unless you ignore it. And I think that's one of the key issues. So promoting caring for other people is why you're here in the course. And then actually coming up with potential solutions that actually do make a difference in the world is what global health is all about, or I should say global health. It's really helping individual people better manage their health so that we have better health outcomes in communities throughout the world. So that's lecture number 1. You guys have survived a massive 3-hour lecture. Thank you very much. I don't know, do you have any comments, criticisms, concerns, jokes, anything you'd like to share? So there is a discussion post available after each class. I do raise a whole bunch of discussion questions. You're not required to answer those questions. You can come up with your own comments. I mean, one of the easiest things to do is just answer 1 or 2 of those questions. But you're also free to share your own observations, comments, concerns, articles that you've read with other people, that you want to share with other people, whatever. I mean, use the discussion post to challenge us. You can also get into a dialogue with each other about some of the responses. So the more we participate in those discussion posts, the better it is. I'll certainly weigh in on each of your responses, but I also encourage you guys to comment as well with each other. All right, any questions before we close? All right, anything that comes up, you know where I live, just give me a holler, and then we can continue from that. So I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys.
You too.
Bye.